This is Tanoa Lynn Poirier, and I want to welcome you to Comm-Unity Conversations on WNN 95.3 FM and 1470 AM. This show is about you. I want to hear your trials and triumphs, challenges and victories, and how you overcome obstacles every day in our dynamic industry. All callers are welcome to join Community Conversations. This is where we'll discuss all things in common. We'll discuss managers, directors, vendors, and owners. Let's elevate the conversation. Raise the bar. Start here, now. Welcome, listeners. Happy Friday. You made it. You did it. Congratulations. Thank you for my team for another great week. You know how I feel about you. Thank you for everything you do. I have got a great treat for you today, a really great guest for a really important topic. I'd like to thank my sponsor, Trusted Construction. You can call them for anything from small jobs to large, from conception to completion. They can do it all. You can reach them at 561-582-5758. But without further ado, I'd like to welcome Paul Mack.
Hello, Tanoa.
Hello, Paul from Mack and Waltz. Paul has been in the insurance business for a while, and I'm going to toss it over to him. Paul, tell us who you are and what you do.
It's great to be here. Thanks for having me today.
Thank you for coming.
Mack and Waltz has over 800 community associations that we insure for property, liability, D&O insurance, and that's really our specialty, but we do all kinds of commercial insurance. And we've been doing it for in Florida here for next year will be 25 years.
Holy cow. Yeah. Congratulations.
Yeah. Thank you.
Good. And there's a reason you've been doing it for 25 years. Yes. So I met Paul at a continuing ed class, and he blew me away with his knowledge and his presentation. And so I am going, this was the actual presentation pamphlet that I've had for a couple of years. Full disclosure, Paul and I do business together. After that presentation, I begged him to help me, and he's done a great job helping me. So thanks again for that, full disclosure. On my hot button today for insurance, and I think it's probably true for most community associations, is the issue of insured vendors, particularly workers' comp insurance. Can you help me explain to the listeners why that's important?
So workers' comp is a no-fault system. So anybody who works for one of the vendors that gets hurt is entitled to statutory workers' compensation benefits, regardless of whether they caused the injury or who caused the injury. And the lack of workers' compensation, the employer or the vendor themselves could actually be liable without any defense. So the employee gives up his or her right to sue, but the employee gives up his or her right to defend the case.
Wow.
So in the absence of a workers' comp policy, it opens up the association for a lawsuit where there should have been a policy in place to prevent that.
Absolutely. And the cost of that policy is really reasonable to the association. One of the things, actually, a couple of things happened in my business. Because associations are getting more clear about this because of people like Paul in their business, and he does a great job of presenting this to clients, is that you have to have higher insured vendors. General liability, workers' comp, and they have to be licensed as well, if applicable. One of the vendors whom the association has had a long-standing relationship with decided that the cost burden was too great, and they were going to go to independent contractors and eliminate that workers' comp insurance. So the owners of the company are exempt, and then they use independent contractors who tell them, yes, we're insured, but there's no way I can be sure as a community manager or a management company owner. And so I basically recommended to the board that we're going to have to find somebody who is. Is that something you find?
That's a very slippery slope, and we see that a lot. And just because a vendor says, well, now I'm going to make these employees 1099s doesn't necessarily mean that they are a independent contractor. So they have to pass a very detailed test. Do they use their own tools? Are they told what to do? Do they have the ability to make or lose money every time they're hired on the job? And if they're not, and they get injured, well, now guess what? They're entitled to benefits. And if there is no policy, then somebody's got to pay for their injuries, and generally they start suing everybody around them. And that's really where the danger lies, is that uninsured exposure. The lawyers look for deep pockets, and the associations have deep pockets. They have liability because the injury could have, well, if it's on the association's property, they're going to be sued. Right.
And Paul is exactly right that, it's kind of a buckshot approach, right? They just see where they're going to be able to get money, so everybody gets sued. The management company gets sued, the association gets sued, and the employer gets sued if it's an employee. And they want to go where there are deep pockets. So if you can explain that even though in many cases the association is covered with workers' compensation because they've gotten good advice, you have to be covered even though they don't have any employees of their own. It covers, tell me what that covers, and then tell the listeners why workers' compensation that they purchase for their protection doesn't protect them against non-insured vendors.
Right. Okay. So the first part of that is there's a policy that every community association can buy. It costs about $700 a year, and it's the greatest value in the entire insurance program for the community association. Because think about how much we pay for windstorm insurance, and the cost is so high, the deductibles are so high. This is a $700 policy that basically provides peace of mind when the association hires somebody. For example, it's generally in two areas where the greatest exposure is. So they hire a handyman or they hire a janitorial company. Those are the two areas where you have true independent companies that are real companies that hire employees. And they're expensive because they have all that labor burden. They have the workman's comp and the payroll taxes and all of that. So they find somebody in the community that may be related to one of the board members, and he or she's doing a great job.
That never happens.
And it never happens, right? When I try to sell this policy, they always say, we always hire licensed insured vendors, and we do an audit of the file.
Right. Yeah.
But so this policy is $700, and it protects the association in the event that they misunderstood or they made a bad hiring decision. And I'll just kind of illustrate an example that really happened, and it happened more than once.
Good.
So someone's hired to do some maintenance around the community, and they fire their janitorial maintenance company and they hire a relative of the community, and it's a lot less money, and he's doing a great job. So for all intents and purposes, it looked like the right move until he fell off the cabana roof cleaning the gutter, getting leaves out of the gutter, and he got hurt. So he had a lot of medical bills. He couldn't work, and saw one of the lawyers on TV that said, give me a call. So he calls the lawyer and he says, well, why don't you file a workers' comp claim? And he said, no, well, I'm not an employee. I'm an independent contractor. And the lawyer said, you're an independent contractor. Do you use their tools? Do they tell you what to do? Do they pay you by the hour? Do you have other customers? And as this conversation went on, it was very clear that he was an employee of the association. He was an independent contractor. Now, now the association has no defense because in workers' compensation system in just about every state, the employer gives up their right to defend themselves, and in turn, the employee gives up his right to sue. But he's entitled to these benefits, and no other insurance policy in the association's portfolio is going to cover this exposure. So it really covers a bad hiring decision, and it also covers some volunteer exposure to the board. But that's really the big benefit of this policy.
Right. So, for example, committee members who may be on the landscape committee and they're in a golf cart and they're all going to look at the flower installation, that kind of thing. They actually, or they have to go out and purchase something on behalf of the association because they want to have a series of flowers to present to make a choice. So while they're acting in the capacity as a volunteer, they're volunteer labor, therefore they're covered under that policy. Is that correct?
That's the key
the broad,
phrase is in the scope of their capacity as volunteer board member or whatever they're doing for the association. That's kind of the key. And then there's and you also, the policy has to contain what's called a volunteer endorsement, because these volunteers or these board members aren't collecting any remuneration for volunteering. So it's important that the policy contain a volunteer endorsement. And there's probably about a dozen well-known insurance companies that write these workers' comp policy. We call them in our industries, they're called if any policies, because there's no technical payroll. If the association hires independent contractors the right way, there really will be no payroll.
Right.
It's just that exposure for somebody that you really didn't know was payroll, or the volunteers. So there's no remuneration to rate the policy. It's just a minimum premium.
So what he said was important about making sure that making sure that you have that endorsement, that volunteer endorsement, and Paul would be happy to review your policies with you if you're a community association. Am I correct?
Absolutely.
To make sure that you have all the endorsements that are needed, because it's the kind of things like having a volunteer endorsement that covers your committee members and your board members who act in the capacity to benefit the association. That covers. So you just want to make sure that you have all your bases covered there.
Yeah, I think one of the greatest values that we can offer community associations is a second opinion without any kind of cost or obligation. We can do what's called a peer review. We'll look over the policies and give you some suggestions on what it is that need to be improved on.
Perfect. The second half of that equation is owners or people even not in community associations who may be listing all over the country, when they hire non-insured workers for their personal home. So for their residents, they just have somebody who works on their property. They hire a company who's not insured. What is their risk liability?
So, it's kind of similar to what it is with the association, but it's got a broader scope because, from an association perspective, they can't control, or they can try. The association can try and control who the unit owners hire, but that vendor is in the home of the unit owner. Right. And in the absence of a workers' comp policy, the unit owner is going to open themselves up to a greater chance of a lawsuit because, again, if that vendor is licensed, insured, and insured properly with workers' comp, and that person who works for the vendor gets injured, well, you're less likely as an owner to get sued because there's an insurance policy to cover costs that injured worker incurred.
Right. Conversely, if you don't have a policy and you want to hire somebody and you direct them to do something maybe even outside of the scope of their normal job, so you hire somebody to be in-care companion, but you'll say, could you get up there and clean the fan, the ceiling fan, and they fall and hurt themselves. That is, and they're not insured because they're the niece of somebody that you know, that could be problematic.
Yes,
would you agree?
Very problematic. And some owners don't buy homeowners insurance, and they're exposed personally, their personal assets are exposed to these lawsuits. They could be very costly to defend. So it seems as though hiring an uninsured vendor is a good way to kind of control cost, and it's great until there's an accident. Right. And then when there's an accident, it's going to seem like the licensed insured guy was a tremendous bargain because of the cost of these. Right. Just to defend.
Right. And for small companies like mine, there is a cost burden attached to that, and we had a discussion earlier. It's the cost of doing business, but you can't compete with somebody who does not have general liability or workers' comp insurance. Of course, they're going to come in with a lower bid, but the risk to the homeowner and the homeowner association and any common interest community is much greater. This is a great conversation. We are going to take a break. We're about the halfway mark, and then we're going to come back and talk about a couple of really interesting things, D&O insurance, and I know the board members are going to be super interested in hearing about that. So hang tight. We'll see you on the other side. Imagine having one place you can call for all your residential needs, whether it's housekeeping, repairs, remodeling, pet sitting, laundry, or anything else your heart desires. La Concierge Services is your answer. Our qualified staff is carefully chosen, experienced, licensed, and insured. They are prompt, professional, and courteous. La Concierge Services is honored to serve in South Florida's most exclusive communities. With La Concierge Services, you have a full-service, personal concierge. We would love the opportunity to earn your business. Call 561-819-2059 for more information. La Concierge Services, your personal concierge. What is on everyone's mind these days when they think of starting a project in their home or community? Where can I find a qualified, certified, and licensed contractor I can trust? allow me to introduce you to Trusted Construction. They have provided expert construction and roofing services in South Florida since 2009. Trusted Construction has earned a reputation for superior, consistent, dependable service. Trusted Construction will guide you from project conception to completion. Call 561-582-5758. Tell them Tanoa sent you. Welcome back. This is Tanoa Lynn Poirier with Community Conversations. And I want to remind you that this show is about you. If you'd like to join the show, you can call us at 888-565-1470. Let's get back to the show.
Somebody will, right?
Yeah, welcome back, listeners. Thank you for coming back. So the first few minutes of the program were really interesting, and it is kind of on my front burner because it's something that we're going through right now. It's something that Paul deals with on a regular basis. And again, if you are not sure whether or not you are adequately covered, please don't hesitate to contact Paul so that he can give you what's called a peer review, correct?
Yes.
And then make sure that you're being covered. And if you are being covered, he'll say, listen, everything's great. Good for you. If you ever run any problems, let me know. If he's not, here's how I can help you, right?
Absolutely.
So here's something that happens in common interest communities. And here's coverage that we want to make sure communities have, and it's called Directors and Officers Insurance. Can you tell the listeners what that is and what that covers?
So D&O insurance covers the directors, officers, volunteers, and in the simplest definition that I can give your listeners is management malpractice coverage.
Perfect description.
So they're making decisions every day on behalf of the owners, right? Like how to spend the money and where to spend it and which vendors to do it, and think about all the decisions that they make. And they also have a fiduciary obligation to the owners to spend the money like it's their own. And a breach of that fiduciary obligation could give rise to a claim or an alleged claim that somebody made a bad decision, and D&O insurance could be there. There's a lot of pitfalls with D&O insurance, which I'm sure you have a lot of questions we'll get into, and there's a couple things that I think your listeners really ought to be aware of.
Please. So the buzzword for Directors and Officers Insurance, shortened to D&O, is management malpractice, right?
Correct.
So that's a great term for that. That's a great term to associate with that. If a director or officer acts in a manner that a reasonable person would in making a decision, that's a reasonable man test. We make a decision based on the information we have before us. It doesn't always work out, but the Directors and Officers Insurance will cover that decision because it didn't work out that way. There was no malintent, or there was no effort to cover up or do anything wrong, right?
Yeah.
But ignoring advice from an attorney or a manager, or ignoring something that's in front of you and making a decision that a reasonable person would not make, is kind of where you start to get into trouble. Have I got that?
Yes.
Close?
Yes. And also it provides defense coverage. So a big component of the cost of a claim is the cost to hire a lawyer if you actually get sued, to answer a summons or to appear in court or just to get advice. I mean, they bill by the hour, and it can rack up, and these things can go on and on and on with depositions and things of that nature that drive up the cost.
Holy cow. That's a question that comes up all the time, and anybody can be sued for anything, right? So
Right.
some board members think that this D&O insurance insures them against getting sued personally.
Right.
And it depends on what decision they made, what criteria they used to make the decision, and again, whether or not a reasonable person in the same circumstance would have made that decision. But that doesn't stop anyone from suing you.
No, never.
Right?
I mean, that's where the big exposure. I mean, anybody can make any kind of allegation that somebody did something wrong. So an insurance company is going to go through the process of evaluating what the allegations are and making sure that it's an insured in the insuring agreement, that the policy is going to cover it. And generally, they will acknowledge receipt of the incident that has occurred, which that's really, really important that your listeners know that if you have anything that gives rise to a claim, that you got to turn that over to your agent to notify the carrier. Because when that policy renews, a lot of carriers have the policy reset what's called the continuity date. And what that means is you're going to answer a question on the application that says, do you know of anything that could give rise to a claim? Are you aware of any kind of circumstances that that occurred during the policy year that may be a claim. And if somebody who's insured, and the definition of who is insured is very, very broad. So if anybody has knowledge of this and you answer that question, no, that you're not aware of anything, and then after that date, you turn in an incident and the insurance company can show that you did, or somebody who was an insured had knowledge of this incident, well, they're not going to cover you. So especially at renewal time, those incidents, those possible claims need to be disclosed to the carrier.
This is really important. I'm glad you brought this up. What happens is if you are a manager on the property and something happens, whether it's general liability, whether it's a D&O, if something happens, there's an incident report, tell your carrier, right? Tell your agent, this happened. I don't know what's going to come of it, but I just want to make you aware of it, right?
Have a conversation with your agent. If your agent understands community associations and they specialize in doing this, they can really be a tremendous value to you, giving you advice.
Right.
You know, if it's something really small, you don't want to notify the carrier for every little thing, just what's meaningful, and your agent should have enough knowledge to say, yeah, we need this, well, we need to report this. This has to get turned over.
Right. If it rises to the level of sort of needing to fill out an incident report because there was somebody fell or scraped their knee or there was a cut or something like that, and you have to fill out that report and file it, you might want to just run it past them and they'll say, I don't think so, but yeah, let's just hold on to it in case something happens. But make sure that you have great documentation in the event that when that questionnaire comes up, you can say, well, there are a couple of things that happened last year.
Yeah, and there's a big difference between a bodily injury claim, a slip and fall claim, which is covered by the association's general liability policy, versus the D&O, which is the management part, decisions that are made, conflicts with possible vendors over the scope of contracts and things of that nature. So anything that's management related would probably fall under the D&O policy. But somebody slips and falls in the common area, any kind of incident like that, I recommend the association have a way of documenting any of those incidents where they capture the condition, because the more information that you can capture for the association, the more ammunition you give to the insurance company to fight. So, the plaintiff is going to say, well, it was rainy that day, or there was a banana peel there, and if you've got documentation to the contrary, then the insurance company's got some muscle to fight.
Yes. So the conditions around the incident, whether there was carpet or slick floor, whether it was raining that day, whether or not there was an obstruction, all those things you just need to... Witnesses. Names and addresses so that you can get in touch with them later, although those things are important.
Very important.
We went a little bit off topic, but it's really important. And we'll have you back to talk about general liability. And is there an endorsement? Is there something that you can tell the listeners about D&O that they should know that is not widely shared?
So, I guess we could bridge into this cyber exposure.
Yes.
So many D&O policies now have coverage and endorsement that they can put on their policies that provide coverage for a cyber exposure. And I say cyber, associations collect data. They collect the owner's driver's license numbers, their social security numbers. They collect all kinds of sensitive data. Accounting information. They have email addresses, home addresses, and there's many laws that say that the association has to safeguard this data. If there's ever a breach, if the data is ever stolen, the association could be obligated to notify the parties that have been affected by this. They could have an obligation to monitor credit. They could be fined by regulators because they didn't safeguard it. They got to hire lawyers. They could be subject to lawsuits. So some D&O policies will put some coverage in place. It's for community associations, I'm amazed at how cheap it is. It'll cost $600 a year to buy really a full cyber policies that can be put on by an endorsement to a D&O policy, but something that definitely associations, as this kind of exposure evolves, need to be aware of. Really need to be aware of, and everybody knows that is aware of identity theft and information inadvertently getting into someone's hands or someone hacking in to get the information. And if you have on-site management where the records are kept on-site, even though there's a management company, sort of as the custodian of those records, a lot of that information is on-site, paper records, and there's usually a digital copy of all of those records. And this insurance for cybercrime is something that came up how recently, because it's just in the last few years that it's gotten really I'd
serious
say,
about it.
in the last year, in the last
Yeah.
12 months, it's
Yes.
it's out there. And now there's more and more insurance companies that are starting to provide this coverage.
Well, I think it's important, and for $600 a year, I mean, in some associations we pay more than that in postage,
Exactly.
right?
Exactly.
So insurance is to insure you against a foreseeable risk. It doesn't mean it's going to happen, but that's what insurance is, right? And so what percentage of your clients do you think take advantage of that?
A very high percentage do now, just because, and at our recommendation, it's a very inexpensive cost factor, so it really makes a lot of sense. And in the present environment, the high cost items like property insurance are really coming down because we're 12 years removed from a hurricane, and so we could take those dollars that are going off the table because there's value in that and reinvest it in coverages they didn't have, and they're still saving money and they're getting much better insurance.
Well, there's so much to cover, and we only scratched the surface. I want to thank Paul again. Tell people how they can reach you.
They can reach us at www.macinsurance.com or at 1-800-351-4224.
Thanks again to my sponsor, Trusted Construction. You can reach them at 561-582-5758. It's been fun. He's definitely coming back if he agrees. I hope you found this informative. I enjoy serving you information every week. Come back next week for another great program. Have a good weekend. Be a blessing to somebody today. You have been listening to Community Conversations with Tanoa Lynn Poirier. It is my honor to host this program, and I appreciate you listening. We have an exciting show planned for you next week, so mark your calendars and join me every Friday at 5 p.m. on WNN 95.3 FM and 1470 AM. We look forward to hearing from you, our listeners. It's all about learning, sharing, and teaching. We're all in this together. Until next time, be a blessing to someone and endeavor to persevere.